The HOA fined me $30,000 for a cabin they didn't even own jurisdiction over, and honestly, if they'd just left me alone, nobody would have discovered the money they'd been stealing from the neighborhood for almost 10 years. Funny how greed works like that. One bad decision turns into another, then another, until suddenly a woman who spent her whole life pretending to be respectable is getting hauled out of a community meeting in handcuffs while 80 homeowners clap like they're watching fireworks on the 4th of July. My name's Daniel Mercer, and 2 years ago I wasn't looking for a fight. Truth is, I was just trying to survive the silence. My wife Claire passed from pancreatic cancer in late October, right when the leaves were turning copper across northern Colorado. 31 years together, then one morning I woke up and the house sounded wrong. No coffee pot humming before sunrise, no old Motown records playing softly from the kitchen, no Claire yelling at me for leaving sawdust in the garage again. Just silence, thick enough to sit on your chest. Now if you've ever lived in one of those upper-middle-class HOA neighborhoods, you know they already feel a little fake on a good day. Perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, people waving at each other without ever really saying anything honest. After Claire died, Silver Creek Estates started feeling like a movie set somebody forgot to tear down. Every morning I'd look out my window and see retired dentists pressure washing driveways that already looked clean enough to eat off of. Couples arguing politely about hydrangeas. Grown adults emailing each other about trash cans being visible for too long. Meanwhile I was sitting in my garage staring at my wife's old gardening gloves wondering how the hell you're supposed to keep living after the one person who understood you disappears. That's when I remembered the property my Uncle Walt left me years ago. 40 acres tucked up in the foothills outside Blackstone Ridge, about 40 minutes from town. No neighbors. No HOA signs. Just pine trees, dirt roads, and enough quiet to hear yourself think again. The first morning I drove up there, I sat on the tailgate of my truck drinking burnt gas station coffee while the sun pushed through the trees, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. So I decided to build something. Not some giant luxury lodge either. Just a small cedar cabin with a wraparound porch, enough room for a wood stove, a workshop, and a decent chair to drink coffee in while snow came down through the trees. Something Claire would have loved. Now here's the thing about me. I spent 34 years as a union electrician. Which means I don't cut corners. I pulled every permit legally possible before I even touched a hammer. Structural permit, septic permit, electrical permit, county inspection approvals, hell, I probably had more paperwork than the courthouse itself. And that should have protected me. Should have. About 3 weeks into construction, I met Veronica Hale. Lord have mercy. You ever meet somebody who smiles like they're doing customer service at a funeral home? That was Veronica. Mid-60s, silver blonde hair sprayed so stiff it probably violated fire code, expensive pink blazer, oversized sunglasses, and that weird corporate voice people use when they're trying to sound polite while talking down to you at the same time. She introduced herself before she even got out of her Lexus. Veronica Hale, president of the Silver Creek Homeowners Association. Not hello. Not nice to meet you. Straight to the title. That should have told me everything. She stepped onto my property like she owned the mountain itself, heels sinking into the dirt while she looked around my cabin frame with visible disgust. Well, she said slowly, This is certainly ambitious. I wiped sweat off my forehead and nodded toward the permit papers stapled near the generator. County approved. She barely glanced at them. County approval and HOA compliance are two very different matters, Mr. Mercer. Now maybe grief had made me slower than usual, but at the time I honestly thought she was confused. Ma'am, this land isn't part of Silver Creek. That smile tightened just a little. We'll see. Then she got back into that white Lexus and drove off down the gravel road like some Disney villain heading back to her castle. 2 weeks later, the certified letter arrived. $30,000 fine. Unauthorized structure violation. Immediate compliance required. I remember sitting at my kitchen counter staring at that number while my coffee went cold beside me. Outside my window, somebody across the street was getting a warning sticker placed on their garbage bin for being visible after pickup hours. Meanwhile, this woman was threatening to financially destroy me over a cabin built almost 1,000 feet outside HOA boundaries. At first I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so unbelievably stupid. Then I noticed the legal letterhead at the bottom. And suddenly it didn't feel stupid anymore. It felt dangerous. Because people like Veronica Hale only act this confident when they've gotten away with things before, and standing there in my empty kitchen, holding that letter in my hands, I had this strange feeling in my gut that my cabin wasn't really the thing she wanted. It was control. And I was about to become a problem she couldn't bully into submission. The next morning I called Veronica Hale directly because, believe it or not, I still thought this whole thing might have been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe somebody on the board looked at an old zoning map, maybe some assistant screwed up paperwork. I mean, normal people don't just invent $30,000 fines for property they don't own. At least that's what I told myself while the phone rang. She answered on the third ring, voice calm as ever. Silver Creek HOA. Miss Hale. This is Daniel Mercer. I got your violation notice yesterday and there's clearly been a mistake. My cabin sits outside HOA boundaries. Long pause. Not confused, calculating. Then she gave this little sigh like I was a child making her repeat something obvious. Mr. Mercer, your property ownership ties you to the Silver Creek community standards regardless of specific geographic placement. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear for a second because I thought maybe I'd misheard her. Ma'am, that's not how property law works. Another pause. Then came that smile through the phone tone people use right before screwing you over. Our legal department disagrees. Failure to comply within 30 days will result in additional penalties and a lien process. Click. Just hung up on me. I stood there in my kitchen listening to the deadline while my old coffee maker hissed in the background, and for the first time since Claire died, I felt anger again. Real anger. Hot enough to wake something up inside me. See, grief does strange things to a man. It empties you out so completely that eventually even fear stops working the way it used to. And Veronica didn't understand that yet. Over the next couple weeks, things got weird. Not dramatic at first, weird. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. People I'd lived beside for 12 years suddenly became fascinated with their mailboxes whenever I walked outside. At the grocery store I caught snippets of conversation stopping the second I turned the aisle corner. That's him, He's unstable since his wife passed. I heard the county's investigating him, and then the surveillance started. I'm not exaggerating either. Every time I drove toward the mountain road, somebody suddenly needed to walk their dog near the entrance. Every lumber delivery got photographed. One afternoon I looked up from installing roof panels and spotted a woman standing 50 yards away pretending to birdwatch while recording me on her phone. Veronica had turned the neighborhood into her own little intelligence network. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. I was staining porch railings up at the cabin when I heard tires crunching slowly over gravel. Veronica's Lexus appeared through the trees followed by a black Mercedes sedan that looked expensive enough to have its own accountant. Out stepped a lawyer. You could tell immediately. Perfect haircut, $1,000 shoes, face like expired mayonnaise. Mr. Mercer, he said smoothly, offering a hand I had zero interest in shaking. Elliot Grayson. Representation for Silver Creek Estates. Behind him, Veronica stood smiling with her arms folded like she'd already won. Grayson opened this leather portfolio and handed me a stack of papers thick enough to stun livestock. Cease and desist. Legal action pending. Property liens. Court fees. Additional violations under review. I flipped through page after page of legal threats while Veronica slowly wandered around my property inspecting things like a prison warden checking cells. Then I saw it. She was taking notes. My generator placement. The fence near the driveway. The storage trailer. At one point she actually measured the distance between my porch stairs and a tree stump. That's when it clicked. This was never about the cabin. She was hunting. Building violations the way serial killers collect trophies. You people really do this for fun, huh? I asked. Veronica looked up calmly. We protect property values. I laughed before I could stop myself. No, ma'am, you terrorize retirees because it makes you feel important. That landed harder than I expected. Her expression tightened for half a second, and right there I caught a glimpse of the real Veronica underneath the polished HOA queen routine. Angry. Vindictive. The kind of person who keeps score over tiny humiliations. The next morning new violation notices appeared in my mailbox. Mailbox improperly aligned $400. Driveway discoloration $700. Unauthorized commercial vehicle $1, 100. My truck was suddenly considered a commercial vehicle after being parked in the same driveway for 8 years. I sat at my dining table surrounded by violation letters while rain tapped softly against the windows, and I finally realized something important. Reasonable people don't escalate this aggressively unless they're hiding something. So I drove down to the Jefferson County Records office. Now if you've never spent time digging through county property archives, let me tell you, those places smell like dust, old coffee, and divorce paperwork. But buried inside all that bureaucracy is the truth, because paperwork doesn't care about ego. 3 hours later I found Silver Creek's original incorporation maps. And there it was. Clear as day. The HOA boundary ended at Ridgecrest Trail. My cabin sat 872 feet beyond it. Not close. Not debatable. 872 feet outside their authority. I remember leaning back in that squeaky courthouse chair staring at the survey maps while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and suddenly this whole thing became very interesting. Because normal people back off once evidence proves them wrong. Veronica doubled down. I mailed certified copies of the survey to every HOA board member along with a polite demand to withdraw the fines immediately. Her response arrived 48 hours later. Independent survey findings deemed unreliable. Violations remain enforceable. That's when I stopped seeing her as a control freak and started seeing her as dangerous. A week later I discovered why. See, while digging through Silver Creek's public filings, I noticed something odd in their financial reports. The HOA collected around $200,000 annually in dues, yet somehow they were spending almost $70,000 a year on legal enforcement. $70,000. For a gated retirement community where the biggest emergency should have been somebody planting the wrong flowers. So I started knocking on doors. At first people were nervous. You could practically see them checking windows before speaking to me. But once I mentioned legal fees, something changed. An older widow named Carol told me she'd been fined $2,000 over unapproved patio furniture. A retired teacher named Frank paid $1,500 because his grandson's basketball hoop violated visual harmony standards. Another couple got threatened with foreclosure proceedings over Christmas decorations. Every story followed the same pattern. Threats. Lawyers. Fear. Payment. And every single road somehow led back to Veronica Hale. By the end of that week I wasn't just fighting for my cabin anymore. I was staring at a neighborhood-wide extortion machine disguised as an HOA. Then came the moment everything exploded. Friday evening. Emergency community meeting notice. Mandatory attendance requested. Subject line, discussion regarding dangerous resident harassment and legal liability. My name wasn't written anywhere on that paper. But every single person in Silver Creek knew exactly who it was about. And deep down, I think Veronica believed she was about to publicly humiliate me into silence. What she didn't know was that I was walking into that meeting carrying evidence capable of destroying her entire empire. The Silver Creek Community Center was already packed when I walked in that night. Rain hammered softly against the windows, people whispering in nervous little clusters while Veronica Hale stood near the front arranging papers with the confidence of someone who thought she still controlled the room. But something felt different. Folks weren't smiling at her anymore. They were watching her. That tiny shift right there, that's how power starts slipping away from people like Veronica. Not with screaming. Not with drama. Just silence. Doubt. The moment people stop automatically believing you. She opened the meeting with that same polished corporate voice. Thank you all for attending this emergency session regarding ongoing harassment against the Silver Creek Homeowners Association. Then she looked directly at me. Certain individuals have chosen to spread misinformation about board operations while engaging in increasingly erratic behavior. A few people shifted awkwardly in their seats. I just sat there calm. See, Veronica expected anger. She expected yelling. What she wasn't prepared for was patience. Because patience scares dishonest people to death. She kept talking about community standards, legal liability, property values, the usual HOA dictatorship starter pack. Then she introduced a proposal for a special emergency assessment. $2,000 per household. To fund legal protection against malicious resident attacks. That's when I finally stood up. The room went quiet immediately. I carried a cardboard archive box to the front table and set it down slowly. You mind if I ask a couple questions first? Veronica smiled tightly. As long as they remain respectful. Oh, absolutely. I opened the box. Inside were copies of county surveys, HOA financial reports, contractor invoices, bank records, weeks of digging laid out piece by piece like ammunition. Then I pulled out the boundary map. According to Jefferson County records, I said calmly, my cabin sits 872 feet outside Silver Creek Authority. Murmurs spread instantly. Veronica crossed her arms. As previously explained, HOA jurisdiction is more nuanced than simple property placement. No ma'am, another voice suddenly said from the back, it really isn't. Everybody turned. An older man stepped forward wearing muddy boots and a canvas work jacket. Howard Pike. Retired county surveyor. Apparently Carol the widow had called him after hearing my story. Howard walked straight to the front, unfolded his own certified survey maps, and placed them beside mine. Been surveying property in this county 42 years, he said. That cabin ain't HOA property. Not even close. The room erupted. People started talking over each other. Questions flew everywhere. Then Frank the basketball hoop guy stood up. Hold on, if Daniel's violations were fake, what about ours? That's when the avalanche started. One by one neighbors began sharing stories. Thousands in fines. Threatening letters. Lawyers. Foreclosure warnings. Meanwhile Veronica kept trying to regain control, but every answer sounded thinner than the last. And then Carol stood up holding a folder and shaking hands. I think people should see this too. Turns out her late husband had served as HOA treasurer years earlier before resigning unexpectedly. Before he died, he'd copied financial records because, in his exact words, something about Veronica didn't smell right. Carol opened the folder. The room changed instantly. Payments to fake maintenance companies. Inflated landscaping invoices. Legal bills triple normal rates. A consulting company receiving HOA money registered directly to Veronica's home address. You could literally hear people breathing harder. The realization spreading through the room was almost physical. This woman hadn't just abused power. She'd been stealing from everybody. For years. Veronica's composure finally cracked. These documents are being deliberately misrepresented. No, I interrupted quietly, you just finally got caught. That hit hard. I watched panic flicker across her face for the very first time. Then came the final blow. Howard slid another document onto the table. A transfer history showing nearly $180,000 routed through shell companies tied to Veronica and 2 outside contractors. The room exploded. People started shouting. One woman burst into tears. Frank looked like he wanted to flip the damn table over. And through all that chaos, Veronica suddenly snapped. Not elegantly either. She pointed directly at me, face red, voice shaking. You think you're some kind of hero? You were supposed to fold like everybody else. Dead silence. Whoops. There it was. The truth finally slipped out. Not community standards. Not property values. Fear. That's all this had ever been. Fear and control. Then the front doors opened. 2 sheriff deputies walked inside. I'll never forget the sound of those boots against the tile floor. Deputy Ramirez approached calmly. Veronica Hale? She froze. We have a warrant regarding financial fraud, embezzlement, and unlawful coercion investigations involving Silver Creek Estates. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. And Veronica. Lord. For a second she looked genuinely confused, like consequences were things that only happened to other people. Then came the screaming. Not graceful screaming either. Real ugly panic. This is harassment. This entire neighborhood turned against me because of him. She pointed at me again while deputies cuffed her wrists. And honestly, I didn't feel triumphant. That's the strange part. Standing there watching this woman unravel in front of everybody, mostly I just felt tired. Tired of bullies. Tired of grief. Tired of people using fear to control communities that were supposed to protect each other. The criminal investigation lasted almost a year after that. Turns out Veronica had been running similar scams through multiple HOA partnerships across northern Colorado. Fake contractors. Inflated legal fees. Manufactured violations designed to pressure elderly homeowners into paying fines they didn't actually owe. By the time federal investigators finished digging, over $2 million in fraudulent transactions had been uncovered. Silver Creek nearly collapsed from the scandal. But weirdly enough, it also became a better place. Neighbors started actually talking to each other again. HOA meetings became normal conversations instead of courtroom intimidation sessions. Frank got his basketball hoop back. Carol helped redesign the community garden Claire always used to complain about. And my cabin? I finally finished it that winter. First snowfall of December. I remember sitting on the porch wrapped in Claire's old wool blanket while smoke curled from the chimney into the cold mountain air, and for the first time since losing her, the silence didn't hurt anymore. It felt peaceful. Sometimes people online ask me if fighting Veronica was worth it. Honestly? Yeah. Not because I won. Not because she lost. But because communities fall apart when good people stay quiet just to keep things comfortable. Bullies survive on exhaustion. On isolation. On convincing ordinary folks they're powerless. And maybe that's the real reason this whole thing spread so far beyond one stupid cabin dispute, because deep down, everybody's dealt with a Veronica Hale at some point in life. Somebody who mistakes authority for ownership. Somebody who thinks fear lasts forever. Anyway, I want to know what you think. Was Veronica just corrupt from the start, or did power slowly turn her into that kind of person over time? And honestly, if your HOA tried fining you $30,000 for property they didn't even own, would you fight back, or would you pay just to keep the peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because trust me, after this whole mess, I learned one thing for sure. Neighborhood drama is never really about fences, cabins, or mailboxes. It's always about power.